Coming up, should the Nets cash in their chips for a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade this summer? I answer that question after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. We're going to discuss whether the Nets should try to trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo this summer before offering some of our favorite early draft prospects. I'm joined now by Lucas Kaplan, a colleague of mine on the Nets beat, writes for Nets Daily, also a host of the Backcourt podcast. How's it going, man? How's the offseason been treating you so far?
It's been a very big 180 in terms of my day-to-day because, I'm covering the Liberty now in the offseason, and they are the WNBA's best team, and it's like just a nonstop avalanche of good vibes and great basketball. And so it's a little bit different than our experiences covering the 26-win Nets. But
yeah,
nice to see you again.
Yeah, and now you gotta depart from all those good vibes and come on to this Nets podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo and obviously the elephant in the room of this offseason, the Nets' potential pursuit of him. It seems like he's holding up the entire NBA right now. And first segment, I wanted to start it off. This is the question amongst the entire Nets fan base right now is, should the Nets push their chips in for Giannis? Is it a realistic path to a contender? Is it, a wise plan on their end? Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there, but your initial thoughts and where you're leaning on that, would you say they should pursue Giannis or should they not?
I've sort of softened up lately because I get why both parties probably eye a potential marriage as appealing. But at this point, it just seems like the timing is a little bit off. Like if it were 2 years in another direction for the Nets, if it were 2 years ago, if it were 2 years in the future, maybe they could trade for Giannis and swing a championship level roster. But right now, how far they are away from building out a 1 through 9, 1 through 10, contending level team, it just doesn't seem like the timing's right. I'm sure Giannis does love New York. We read those reports. I'm sure the Nets love Giannis. I've seen those reports too. But it probably is just one of those things, right person, wrong time. At least that's how it seems to me. But the more I've thought about it, I get why it exists. I get why these rumors are in the air.
And when you had your opinion going into the season, I've been pretty firm, at the end of this season, the regular season into this, that I was in the camp that they shouldn't do it. I think that you had a similar opinion to me there during the season. The way that these Eastern Conference playoffs have shaken out, has that changed your opinion on the subject and kind of the outlook, the landscape of the conference? And does that really, impact the way, does that impact how you feel that they should build out at all?
I do think, like I said, when I use the word softened, it's sort of softened me up a little just because it's so tempting to jump into this Eastern Conference race that seems wide open. You know what I mean? But ultimately, I don't think I've deviated that far from what we talked about during the season, and just that the timing doesn't make sense. And it's tough to imagine them, they probably have to give up a couple high quality rotation players just to make salary meet, but also because the Bucks probably want to remain relevant. It's not like, they have a ton of their own draft assets left. It's not like there's a big incentive for them right now to be bad. So you have to give up maybe Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, Day'Ron, whoever. Well, Day'Ron's free agent, but whoever can actually help the team next year is probably in a trade. So I don't want to watch the Giannis Drew Timmy front court of the future. I'm not super into that. No offense to Tim A.
Yeah, it'd be like a Giannis and the kids, like we had KD and the kids. But I don't think anybody's voluntarily looking to go into a situation like that. And that is a little bit of the conundrum. What you said is the Nets are extremely short on, rotation, playoff rotation caliber players. I think obviously Cam Johnson is the one who you can say is that level of player. Claxton, potentially in the right fit, right situation.
Right.
I think the jury's very much still out on Cam Thomas. I spoke about that last time. And, you said like multiple rotation players having to be included in the deal. Like if they had to give up CJ in the deal, I think that's kind of like a non-starter. Like I think they would only be negotiating frameworks where they don't have to give up CJ unless they had some other plan in the deal to kind of replace him. But he's like that only guy. So if you're putting yourself behind the eight ball and taking away that piece while bringing in Giannis, I think like you need to have CJ alongside that guy. And when you're kind of looking at the way that they could game this out, like the way that I put it yesterday on the pod when I was talking about it was, is it out of the question that they could use, they could swing a trade for Giannis, use their remaining cap space and what they have left to field a roster that has a chance to win the Eastern Conference next year? I don't think that's out of the question. I think, when you look at some of the guys that could potentially be free agents, whether you're talking about Naz Reid or, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the Timberwolves guys, some of the other guys, potential buy low guys, salary dumps. I was looking at the Celtics guys like Porzingis and Drew Holiday. Do you think it's realistic that they could, put together an assortment there, have some picks left over, and still, be competitive in this Eastern Conference to compete with teams like the Pacers, the Knicks, the Cavs, the Pistons, probably the teams that are at the top there? Do you think that's realistic?
I mean, first of all, if Cam Johnson, who I love, is the piece holding up a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade, I think that tells you all that you need to know about the viability of a championship roster. But it's the NBA. If you asked this about the Pacers 2 years ago, if you said, hey, do you think the Pacers can make back-to-back conference finals? I would have said, probably not, man. Like, I don't think so. I didn't think the Knicks were a conference finals team this year. So, of course, it is, I think, possible because they are the only team with cap space, which I'm honestly very intrigued to see how that plays out, especially in a non-Giannis world. It is possible, but not only are you kind of going all in, because you would be going all in on something that I think even the staunchest Giannis believers would admit probably doesn't have a super high probability of happening. You make the finals, the Sixers never get off the ground, the Celtics get hurt, all these teams get hurt, whatever. It goes against everything the Nets have also been talking about for the last year. Like all of a sudden, you're just going to have 7 new players out of the top 9 rotation guys next year. And that's not building it from the ground up. That's not like a coherent year-to-year philosophy. That's just, hey, look at this random team we like assembled with, all this money in the offseason. There's no continuity there or anything. And so is it possible? Absolutely. Maybe Nickeil Alexander-Walker takes a leap. Again, a bigger offensive leap. Maybe Naz Reid does the same thing, but there are just so many conditionals there that it would feel tough to go from, hey, we have such a wide open future with all this cap space and all these picks to, man, if Nickeil Alexander-Walker doesn't take a big offensive leap, we're screwed. That's not a trade-off I would be willing to make personally. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of am in the same camp as you, and we'll talk, the next segment, we'll talk about what we think they are going to do ultimately and some of the messaging that the front office has put out. But yeah, I fall into a similar situation as you where, I feel like these playoffs you use the term soften it up. Like I agree because I looked at the Knicks and I just didn't really think that they had a shot to make the conference finals and get through the Celtics. And they did, obviously. The Celtics had some poor injury luck. They blew a couple 20-point leads and everything along those lines. But that's kind of the point is like in this Eastern Conference, the way that I've been looking at it is like if you give yourself a shot, if you put yourself in consideration, like things might break your way. Like should the Knicks have traded 5 first-round picks from Mikal Bridges? No, I still think it was a bad trade. But like there's a very, very realistic world where they're in the NBA Finals right now. So it's like you give yourself a chance, you put yourself in positions, nothing is, necessarily a high probability outcome of whether or not you're going to be a finals team in the NBA. There are better than others, obviously. And I think that playing it out long term and things along those lines is the better choice of these two. But I think the way that these playoffs have shaken out has given let me see the other side a little bit more and say, hey, there is a case to be made there. There's an argument that is not completely far-fetched, and I could see it there. One of the things that I've really gone back on is I see people talking about this this potential path with the Giannis thing, and I think that it needs to be said obviously that it's like you're not just giving up the picks that, you're going to give up a huge haul and all that things. There's also an opportunity cost associated with throwing away the tank next season and not, giving yourself a shot at this next draft class where I don't know if you've watched, Peterson, DeBansta, Boozer, those guys at the top of that class, it seems like are extremely highly regarded. So not only are you going all in and giving up all these assets and fast tracking your timeline for something that's probably not a very high, probability outcome that you make the finals, you're also passing up on that guy. So that's kind of, where the drawback comes to me. It's a lot you're hoping for to break your way, and you're passing up, a really an opportunity that the Nets have really never seen through since they moved to Brooklyn and since I think we've been following the team.
And if you wanted to see it through, you should have just, and I don't think the Giannis thing is the likely outcome, so I'm speaking a bit, hypothetically here. But if you wanted to trade for Giannis and you didn't want to see that, 2026 draft through, you should have just never traded back for your own picks, because you would have had 4 Phoenix Suns assets as opposed to 2 of your own. And, the Nets probably gave up the most enticing asset package in the league. If you're just talking about, hey, whose midterm future would you most like to control over the next however many years? The Phoenix Suns are pretty high on that list. Now, if you're giving yourself a great chance at one of those top 3 guys in 2026, I totally get moving off that pick package to get your own pick back in 2026. But if you're just trying to assemble a huge package where quantity over quality is the name of the game for Giannis, it wouldn't have really made sense. But again, I do think, and I work for Nets Daily, and so I'm sure a lot of people think that I'm speaking directly through Sean Marks right here because, they pay us off, obviously.
Yeah.
But I know I do think they have a plan, honestly, and I don't think it is to blow the whole future on Giannis this summer. I think a lot of Nets fans could understand probably why that is, especially with the draft picks that you mentioned.
All right, coming up next, we'll talk more about Giannis and whether we think the Nets will push their chips in or decide to stay away. But before that, I want to tell you about our friends at Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone lets you manage business calls and text from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off their first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will move them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, coming back from the break, we talked in the first segment about whether we think the Nets should go after Giannis, but I think we've known from history following this team what the Nets should do and what the Nets ultimately will do often could be different things. So, Lucas, you just gave a little bit of your take, before this. I'm going to give mine, and then you can offer, any input on whether we think the Nets will actually go after this. I think that there's obviously a price point. For the right price, I think that they could be swayed to do it. And if certain things break their way and they see a path through free agency and things along those lines, I think they could. I think they'll definitely investigate it, as they should. I do not think it is at all the likeliest outcome. I think the likeliest outcome is them, not running it back, but running back another tank next season, leaning into the development of the guys they draft and trying to build this out through the draft. And really, for the first time definitely the Brooklyn era, and arguably you can argue longer before that, trying to have a homegrown core that they could set up, multiple high-end young players with a stockload of picks, with a healthy cap sheet, with all of those things. And that just sounds like a much more realistic and honestly just a much healthier and better outcome, especially for the way that teams want to build in this new CBA. So what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And it's funny, because we cover the Nets, I don't think we'll ever be 100% sure of anything, even if it is the obvious move. That being said, if Giannis likes New York and he demands a trade, you have to pick up the phone. And when you have to pick up the phone and make an offer, there's always a chance that that offer is the best one. I don't think it will be, but you have to offer the amount of picks that you're comfortable making, right? If it means you can keep building out the roster, because we've seen more than ever, one really high-end player just is not enough to automatically vault you into title contention. But I think you hit it on the head. Will they pick up the phone? Are they obligated to pick up the phone? Yes. Is it the likeliest outcome? No. I'm pretty confident that this kind of comes and goes and Giannis goes somewhere else. And as the only team with cap space in an offseason where it sounds like there's going to be a ton of trades and a ton of teams that need, a quote unquote third team to facilitate a deal, that's a really appealing spot for the Nets to be in. But they are the Nets, and recent history suggests that you can never put anything by them. So I'm going to be keeping one eye open, but I'm pretty confident that Giannis will not be in Brooklyn in the near future.
And I think that a lot of the messaging that the Nets front office, obviously I've spoken at length. You can never take anything any front office executive says as gospel. Like I asked Sean Marks at the exit interview their, feelings about trading Cam Johnson. He spoke glowingly and said they're in no rush to trade a guy like that. They could trade him before draft night. It wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. But they have been speaking about sustainable success. Like that's kind of been a phrase that Sean has been using a lot.
Yep.
And if you're going to trade back for your picks, as you outlined in the previous segment, and do all these things to try to set yourself up, talk about building sustainable success, have the Scout YouTube series where we're talking all about scouting the Nets of the future and all that stuff, to turn around and trade it all for Giannis, who's 30 years old, and kind of go all in on a team that, while it could have a chance, it's a dicey proposition. That would be a pretty tough, sell and a tough 180. Are there fans who would get excited about it? No doubt. I mean, we are still talking like, I feel like it might sound like we're being so negative and just poo-pooing the idea. And we are talking about a guy who's still a top 3-4 player in the NBA in his prime. So it's kind of tough to say, like, you don't want that guy in the New York market. Like
by September, I would talk myself into it. I would be like, they shouldn't have done it. Give me 2 months. We could talk ourselves into watching Giannis for 80 games a year. I think I could do it.
You said, we're talking about, and if we're talking about whether we think that they will do it, we also have to talk about who potentially the other teams could be, what, the bidding war could look like. And something that I spoke about on, my episode yesterday was just, if you're looking at the landscape of the NBA, obviously, and you're a guy like Giannis who's trying to get back to the NBA finals, it seems like the East is a much better bet than the West in terms of where would Giannis want to go. And honestly, the two teams that I was looking at as the biggest threats, to the Nets, in a potential Giannis like bidding war, I thought the Spurs were definitely in there. I thought that obviously the Rockets would be in there. If you're Giannis, are those enticing situations? Are you confident enough in your abilities that you could join Wemby, you could join that Houston core and make it out of the West? Definitely, I feel like, but it's definitely way tougher to be in that Western Conference. So if you're looking at the East and we're talking about if he's keen on staying in the East, which is not definitely the case, but I think there's a decent chance that could be, part of the thought process, obviously. The Nets seem like they could have one of the better packages in terms of just the overwhelming amount of picks they have. I spoke, some other teams I mentioned, like I thought not teams that Giannis would necessarily want to play for maybe, which is a big part of this, but I thought like the Raptors, the Magic, the 76ers all have stuff in terms of young players and picks that they could involve. But if we're talking about the Eastern Conference and we're limiting it to those teams and saying he wants to stay in the East, do you feel like the Nets come out with, the best package and are able to win that bidding war? Because, I don't really see a ton of teams with a combination of market, assets, and everything that they have.
I do think that if they voluntarily enter themselves into a bidding war, that they can win it. I mean, they can set the Bucks up long term. They can offer a couple nice rotational pieces. I haven't really gone too deep into the trade machine yet, but as a non-tax team, the team I would like in the East is Indiana. Like, let's say they fall short. You know what I mean? The salary outside of Pascal and Giannis could get it done. Like Nembhard, Toppin, Nesmith, is enough to salary match. And I don't know. That's just one. I don't know what their pick
No,
situation is.
I agree. I omitted. I kind of went through the top teams yesterday talking about it, and I was like, would the Cavs offer up Evan Mobley? Like that would definitely get them in the conversation. I don't think they would do that. So I said no. Like, would Boston offer Jaylen Brown and picks and other things? I didn't think that made sense for them with Tatum going down. The Pacers are a team I omitted just because I didn't know. If they get smoked and swept and blown out in every finals game, it's a different conversation. But I was like, they just made this great run, so inspiring. Everybody likes this team. Would they trade a lot of that in for Giannis? Like, I didn't think so, but like you said, like it probably depends on how the finals shake out.
Yeah, and they got a lot of their own first round picks, is all I'm saying. Although I'm becoming the NBA podcaster that I hate, and that this super fun basketball team is about to play in the NBA finals, and I'm like, they should trade for Giannis. I think Bill Simmons would be proud of me right now. But yeah, the Nets could win a bidding war. I don't know if Giannis. Listen, it's New York City. You can never discount that. I'm sure he loves it here. Who wouldn't? But in terms of just a pure basketball fit, that is the main question. Everything else, location, possible package, the Nets would be the front runners.
And, last thing before we get into the final segment, I think there's obviously a concern. Like, people talk about the building out, like, sustainably, building through the draft, all that. You'll have a runway for, however long. And then they look at the Giannis thing, and I think they think he's older. He's a guy who relies on, physicality and athleticism, and look at it as a shorter window. Giannis is 30, so the length of the window really depends on how you view his game aging. And the way that the Nets front office is viewing that might be different from how the fan base and you and I are viewing that. When you look at Giannis, obviously, there's a lot of conversation. People say his game is reliant on, physical dominance, athleticism, explosiveness, all that. He's 30 years old. How's that going to age? How do you feel about that question of, how is Giannis's game going to age?
I think it's just one of those things that you can't try to base the strategy of a trade around a prediction. He could blow out his knee in game 1 and it totally changes his future. He could, by the way, one of the best long mid-range shooters in the NBA this year, very quietly, Giannis. Mm-hmm. So does that portend really well to his long-term future? Maybe. Is he going to forget how to shoot next year? Also could happen. So I think it's hard to truly, have a prediction. He's this big physical guy. He gets downhill. Typically you think, oh, well, he's not going to be the same physical force at age 36 or whatever. But if you are really, really worried that he's going to be a significantly, less impactful player at age 34, or if you're so solidly convinced that he's still going to be a top 5 player at age 34, 35, and you're basing what you're going to do around that, either way, I would caution against that. It's just hard to see into the future with these sort of things. And I don't think you have to consider his play style too heavily. It's just a hard thing to predict.
So I think Lucas and I both fall on the same, playing in both of these, opening segments. Do we think that the Nets should do it? We both lean towards no. Do we think that they will do it? We both lean towards no, but anything is possible with this Brooklyn Nets franchise in this market. So we'll see. And coming up next, we're going to close out the show talking about some prospects in the Nets draft range who stand out as home run selections above the others. We'll tell you who those players are to close out today's show after this. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough: men's mental health. There's this pressure to always keep it together, to perform, provide, never show weakness. But the truth is, real strength comes from opening up and taking care of your mental well-being. Every year, 6 million men in the U.S. experience depression, and many go undiagnosed. But talking to someone, a friend, a loved one, or a therapist can make a huge difference. Therapy isn't just for crisis moments. It's great for learning how to set boundaries, build healthy coping tools, and be the best version of yourself. With over 35,000 licensed professionals, BetterHelp makes it easy to find a therapist who understands you. You can connect from anywhere, switch therapists at any time, and fit sessions into your schedule with just a click. At the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Coming back from the break and closing out today's episode of Locked On Nets with Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. We're going to talk some draft, obviously, because the Nets have 4 first-round picks, and we're going to focus on this top pick at number 8 because, the Nets obviously fell from number 6 in the lottery odds to 8. That put a lot of tier 2, I'd say, prospects in their range, and they really do have a big range of guys that they could select from. And, some of those, there are divisive opinions amongst a lot of them. So, Lucas, you're a big X's and O's guy. From what you've watched of these prospects, do you have any guys who are early favorites standing out above the rest?
Yeah, I would say that I really haven't watched enough of the draft this year to be considered. I just want to give respect to the guys who really do this all year round. Mm-hmm. Those are the opinions you should seek out. And as a guy covering an NBA team, parachuting in, in the last month, just to preface, that's where I'm coming from. It's going to be, Nets fans are going to have a certain reaction, but if Kneuppel is there,
I knew you were going to go with Kneuppel. I knew
of course.
But good, keep going.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to be lukewarm on Kneuppel. This is my thing. The guy is obviously a pretty uncommon level of shoot, pass, feel at age 18, 19, freshman year in the ACC. If you think his athletic tools just simply are not NBA quality and he will not be able to be handling any sort of creation load, then you probably shouldn't have him in your top 10. If you aren't so worried about that and you do buy the high-level shooting, high-level feel, high-level touch, you should think this guy's pretty damn good and is a steal at 8. And if the Nets fall into the latter camp, they should take him at 8. I don't know how you feel about Khan, but the guy is so obviously a very, very advanced basketball player already. And I know we're going to do the Joe Harris thing, and I get it. But I was writing articles in year 8 of his career, oh man, look at Joe Harris, make a contested layup after getting by a closeout. Khan's going to do that from day one. So I get it, but that's all I have to say about that.
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that you were going to talk about Kneuppel. And it's funny because it was early in the Nets season last year when the biggest fear amongst the fan base was exactly what happened and them falling to the 8th pick. Kneuppel was this representation of the 8th pick. And he was the embodiment of all the Nets fans' fears. And Brian Lewis from the New York Post, our colleague, went down to North Carolina, wrote an article about him as a potential option, and all of Nets Twitter lost their minds. And that's when I was all right, falling to 8 wouldn't be great. They're hoping for Cooper Flag, obviously. I understand it. But that's when I started to pump the brakes on the fan base a little bit, I feel like. And when I saw him play during the NCAA tournament and got to watch him more later in the season, I was this guy's freaking good. This guy can play.
The guy is good at basketball.
Yeah, this guy has a concrete skill as a sharpshooter, not just a sharpshooter, a movement sharpshooter. He's a guy that has some secondary shot creation, some pick and roll ball handling ability, and he's a pretty advanced passer for his age, I feel like.
I mean, when you watch the NBA playoffs and everybody on the court has to be a high field decision maker, and they also have to be athletic and strong, and I get that, but Khan is checking that first box. It's guaranteed pretty much. I don't even think he'll be there at 8, so I don't want to go too hard on this, but I think if he's there, it'd be a good pick. It'd be a good pick. You can't be that upset with it. And I know we'll get to some other guys, but I think if he's there at 8, which I don't know how likely it is, it would be hard to pass up.
I agree. Yeah. And I also agree with you that I think, based on some people I've talked to and looking at how some of the boards are shaking out, I would not at all be surprised if he was gone before that. But, moving on, other guys we think who are likely, there are the guys like Jeremiah Fears, Trey Johnson, who could get to 8, but I don't think it's the likeliest scenario. Right. Those guys are 8. You can talk about one of those guys if you want, but of the guys you feel who are highly, if not, somewhat likely to be there at 8, anybody else who's really stood out to you early on?
Well, I've watched a lot of Fears. I would ask you this. Let's say Fears and Queen are on the board. Who would you go with?
I would go with Fears. I mean, the Queen discourse has been so interesting, and he's a guy that I think I'll probably do a full episode on because I have some people who I think based on some of his combine testing and things along those lines are dropping him into the teens and of mock drafts and big boards. And then I have some people who are I would take this guy 4th overall.
Yeah. Dan Olinger of the rights to Ricky Sanchez, who's I worked with at SIS, great basketball mind, written about the Sixers for years, published a long piece sticking his neck out saying the Sixers should just take him at 3. And this is like a smart basketball guy. It's an interesting article. So Queen is like the one where it's a really interesting evaluation.
Well, what's your take on the skill set? Because obviously, like, there's a projection, there's like a model. You could see it's an interesting player for a guy like Jordi Fernandez, who has coached guys like Jokic and Sabonis and had some of these half-court hub big men. I think the drawbacks obviously come from the grounded athleticism, because I was there watching all the testing.
Right.
He was at the bottom of every single testing category, like historically low, like all-around score in that area. And he is a little bit older for a freshman. I think that'll play into some projections. What's your opinion on that?
I think the age thing is real because of what I'm about to say. And the combine testing is not nothing, but the guy has been, and this is really the sell, and you have to believe in it if you believe in Queen, one of the most physically gifted and talented drivers of the basketball, getting to the paint, to the rim, at basically every level, every competition stage he's played in. And so you can look at the combine testing and you can look at the age, but it's like nobody can keep this guy from getting to the rim. And he's shown some outlandish passing skills. The numbers haven't always been there, but he cooks big men off the dribble. The footwork is great. He's so strong with a smaller guy on him. And it just feels like there is a lot there. And it feels, and this is like not a very smart way to look at basketball, but it feels like you watch these highlights and he's on all-star teams in 5 years. I'm going to feel really stupid for being like, like he didn't jump high at the combine, like pick him at 20. Mm-hmm. That being said, I would need to watch more. I'm not totally sure, but that's also going to be one where the Nets are just so starved for young high-end talent, where if you pass in him at 8, I get it. It's fine, but it's going to be a little bit of like like, okay, I really hope that doesn't come back to bite us. I would prefer, like, for example, I'd prefer Noah Asang over Yegor Demine. Like, that's something I have to throw out there.
Yeah.
But, there's so many names,
Yeah. We're pushing up against the end of the show right now. So we might need to have you on for a whole nother episode talking about more draft guys. And I'll have a bunch of other people on before we close it out. We're talking about those guys at 8. Do you like the Nets obviously have 19? They could trade into the late lottery. Like any of the guys who you don't feel like should be in consideration at 8, maybe they're mid to late lottery guys, maybe they're early 20 guys, anybody who you really like in that regard who has stood out?
I'm seeing Jace Richardson fall
to like 20s and some
fall in the 20s.
Yeah.
I get it. Small guard, combine testing, whatever. The guy, again, just good at basketball. Just a good basketball player as a freshman in a high major conference. Like, I would be thrilled if the Nets took a swing on him if he's there at 19. Guys like that are very clearly, like, again, have these skills that you maybe have to mold, or that you maybe just have to see if like they can handle the next level in terms of athleticism, size, and all that. But those are guys that are just really fun to watch as rookies, like a little bit like maybe a higher end, like Marcus Sasser for Detroit, where, small, whatever, but you come in, you're like, wow, this guy can really play basketball. I tend to like prospects like that. I don't know if there's anybody that you've seen that you would like as maybe a snag at 19 or 25 or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't, delved too deep into that. I'm focusing on number 8, but based on, some of the takes we're pushing up against the end of the show here, we're going to have you back on, maybe potentially this week to talk about some of the takes and the opinions, because you're obviously very in tune to what the Nets seem to, be looking for, obviously, historically, and what some of these prospects, skills that they bring to the table and how that could project, obviously, to modern day basketball. So we'll circle back. We'll have a lot more talk about these draft prospects and all of those things. But that does it. That's all the time we have today for this episode of Locked On Nets. Thank you to all of you for tuning in, supporting the show. And thank you to Lucas for being on here and talking hoops, Nets Hoops with me. You guys can find all of his work on Nets Daily. Also, the Backcourt podcast on all streaming platforms. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you want to help build this channel. I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.